This is indeed going to be covering a very important missing person case. To me, it's kind of a follow-up. This is the Louisiana case, the case of Louisiana serial killer Daniel Blank. This is very important because it involves some court orders and other things that I've cursory investigated myself. I've investigated this for a bit. And what happened with Daniel Blank is very interesting because he was a recent case as far as he was out and was also committing more homicides and more crimes. But it is believed that he was not responsible in the first original crime scene. So we're going to be covering this for just a moment. It's very important. Pay close attention and get this out there, far and wide. And of course, other DNA was found there. But what has come and really come to mind for me is that someone else was also involved in this murder, not just Daniel Blank. So take a look, spread the word, get it out. And here we go. Thank you. He was a true killer. And for more than 20 plus years, authorities within the state of Louisiana, in Baton Rouge to be exact, have been attempting to decipher exactly what occurred with Daniel Blank, as well as some of his recent crimes going into 2019 and further. A federal court judge has ordered multiple Louisiana law enforcement agencies to turn over all evidence from River Parish serial killer Daniel Blank, so the evidence can be independently tested for all strains or remains of DNA. District Attorney Ricky Babin said he is confident Blank must be guilty, does not expect this ruling to change after more than 20 years. However, Blank initially confessed to the series of home invasions, but then recanted his confession. The federal ruling notes that the DNA that was collected from 3 different crime scenes do not match Blank himself and may match another perpetrator who was at the scene. These include a bat, cigarette remains, and DNA as well that was found under the victim's fingernails. Deoxyribonucleic acid, which contains a person's genetic code, was found at the crime scene, which does not match Daniel Blank. In 1999, the jury convicted Daniel of the 1997 murder of 71-year-old Lillian Felipe of Gonzales, Louisiana. Felipe was beaten and stabbed to death in the bedroom of her parish home. Authorities say Blank confessed to killing Felipe and the 5 other victims during those years, as well as other additional murders afterward. However, prosecutors claim Blank robbed and killed the victims to fuel a gambling addiction, which doesn't make sense. And in 2016, the Louisiana Supreme Court agreed and halted the execution to find out more information. U.S. District Court Brian A. Jackson ordered the independent testing on all pieces of evidence from the various crime scenes, overturning the lower courts and also the county court. In the ruling, Jackson said that despite the violent nature of the crimes, there are large amounts of fingerprints, DNA, and other collected evidence that do not produce any forensic link that will connect Blank to the crime scenes of any of the victims. Instead, the state's case relied exclusively on Blank's videotaped confession to those crimes. And so, to sum this up, folks, this is a very important decision. And I'm not going to go over the entire court order. You want to read that, you can definitely go and read that. There's not going to be time to go over the entire court order. But it's an important decision because they're not saying that Daniel Blank wasn't involved in these crimes. They're testing every single part of the crime scene to determine who else was actually involved in these Louisiana serial killing murders. And there was a number of very strange and interesting murders that occur after he's already gone, or he was locked up, because he was in lockup for a long time. But there are, I will say, accomplices to Daniel Blank. And that's why this has been one of the most important cases that I've seen in the Louisiana state history so far. Because they're finally admitting, and this isn't that long ago where they admit to this, but they are finally admitting that Daniel Blank most likely or very probably did not act alone. He couldn't have committed more than, 7 murders? All entirely on his own. That would make him very, very special indeed if he was capable of doing that.
Lawyers for convicted serial killer Daniel Blank have been given another chance to fight for his life. The Louisiana Supreme Court agreed to delay his execution that was set for next month. Blank is convicted of beating and stabbing a 71-year-old woman to death while robbing her home in 1997. But he is also accused of killing 6 people in 10 months. Blank's attorney says his client has not exhausted his appeal options.
So, and that's just spin for the fact that there are other elements of this case that have been uncovered that deserve a deeper investigation. And so, in keeping with the spirit of that, there's going to be a part 2 that's going to go kind of more into the finer details of this case. But just to sum it up, he was guilty of killing Victor Rossi, Barbara Borges, Lillian Felipe, Sam Arcuri, Luella Arcuri, and Joanne Brock of Gonzales, Louisiana, and also Laplace and Paulina between the years 1996 and 1997. He was also convicted again for another murder that took place nearby and was sentenced in Livingston, Texas. He got a sentence actually from Livingston for one of the key crimes. The key issue is the execution. We have worked very hard to get it stayed. There is no reason why an execution date should have been set. And I would agree with that in that there's no reason why an execution for a real long-time serial killer like Daniel Blank should have been rushed through, would be the correct term to use here. Because what I believe to be the case now, based upon some of the initial investigation I did of the Arcuris, or Luella Arcuri, and their family, is that there was part of this involving an actual revenge killing. And so that wouldn't link directly to Daniel Blank necessarily. There was someone who was very jealous of the Arcuris for some reason. And I'm 100%, and so I'm 100% convinced of the fact, someone else was there during a number of these murders, especially the murder of Arcuri in this particular case. And it was not Daniel Blank, is the bottom line. And I'm not going to play the devil's advocate or try to be coy about anything in the video, okay, folks, because I 100% refuse to embellish anything. Rather than play coy like they do in some of these news articles, I believe he was there. This article was in October 7th, 2021. I think that Daniel Blank was at the house of the Arcuris and the other victim. I believe he was there. No different than someone being involved in a robbery and holding the door open. That's the extent that I believe Daniel Blank was involved. But I don't discount the fact and say, he's not guilty. I 100% stand behind my statement that he is most definitely guilty of being involved in these homicides. But I won't pretend and say, based upon research and similar things that I've done, to say he was the culprit responsible for the Arcurys being killed in Louisiana. Louisiana is a very rough state. It certainly makes no sense that just some wandering nomad, or Daniel Blank in this case, suddenly came out and killed all these people. So I'm just narrowing it down to say that I believe there is real reason to suspect some of the DNA being linked to a cousin, someone who knew the Arcurys, in other words, very well, because Daniel Blank did not know the Arcurys to start with, really, in the logistical sense. He didn't have a relationship with them, and so it didn't make sense, even when I read about the case at an earlier time, that he is held responsible for all the Arcurys being killed. So what I'm speaking about here, and this is why this case needs to get out there far and wide, is there is another suspect who knew the Arcurys, who knew the other victim clearly very well, who probably was the DNA that was at the crime scene, or may have shot one of the firearms at the crime scene. Let's not pretend, for example, right now, that there aren't drug dealers and very, very dangerous people in Louisiana, especially given recent so-called sightings of hunters who have been in Louisiana as well. So I firmly believe one of these people, perhaps the cousin that has been kind of looked into a little bit, was involved in the murders, and that it was not Daniel Blank. So Daniel Blank is not innocent, is the way I see it. He's an accomplice to someone else, though, who has committed burglaries and different things, and also committed possibly more than 8 murders. And that's what I want you guys to get. This is why it's so important to highlight certain cases like this, is it shows serial killing is not just an individual one-man sport. That's correct. It involves groups. It involves team effort. And anybody who plays the old Cantor card and says, no, it's just always one lone, deranged, evil person, is not to be trusted. That doesn't mean you can't trust anything they say. It means they are not to be trusted, whether they're in society at large or a part of a law enforcement force or anything else. Their opinion should not be trusted or taken very closely, because as anyone who really studies these things in depth will tell you, serial killing is certainly a team sport. There's normally at least one accomplice, maybe not more than that, but one other person who sets certain things up, who is involved in making sure the murderer can complete the job on time, who is involved in logistics and planning, who handles and holds the actual evidence. And so I will say this once again. Serial killing is a team sport. Let's just ask the actor in Florida recently, Mr. Saget or Mr. Brown, and they will tell you and confirm that without any delay at all. So because serial killing involves multiple factors and is very, very, very rarely ever linked to one lone person, like James Holmes or anything else, certain cases should be reviewed by juries and state juries at the end of the day to determine who else knew about this, who else was involved. And that's why I'm glad to say this entire case of Daniel Blank, including the recent murders he was even guilty of up to 2016 or a little after that, are all being reviewed. That's the bottom line. And as this goes forward, and you guys spread the word more out there and get this out, where it needs to go, people are going to review these cases, rightfully so, understanding that it's a lot more likely that other people were involved, and then determining through forensics and through other updated information who those people are so that justice can be served. Thank you once again. There's a lot that can be learned from this. Daniel Blank was kind of a nomad. He did not really like Louisiana, so it makes little sense, even to me, looking back at this, that he could be the sole killer involved. I mean, does it happen? Yes. Just like once in a while there's a lizard born with two different tails. But it's not likely, and of course it's not going to happen in Louisiana. So I do fully believe someone who was close to the Arcurries and the other victim was involved in the murders. And there's definitely a lot more that can be taken away from this. So thank you for getting the word out there. A lot more attention needs to be brought to these specific cases. Appreciate it. So, and here's what I've been referring to earlier. I still believe there's even one other person involved, but she's a serial killer in New York. Thankfully, is already behind bars. But this is what I was really referring to. This man who's been mentioned in numerous articles before, Daniel Rowling. He also knew the Arcurries, but he knew them a bit more than just seeing them at random. And what's interesting is Danny Rowling has quite a story behind him, because Rowling is of course a member of the Craig, which shouldn't be any surprise at all. He's kind of a member with Christopher Rowling. Apparently they've had a long time association with that. So this is a fascinating case, and it deserves a lot of attention, quite a bit more attention. So I appreciate you guys being able to get this out there. But Cindy Jurisic was on a trip through Florida, in the Florida Panhandle, in August 1990 when she heard a news report about a grisly string of murders in the area. They immediately made her think about a man from her Louisiana hometown church who used to spend a lot of time out on the back porch with the family. That man, who was named Danny Rowling, had told her that one day he was going to leave Shreveport. He gave no explanation for why he would leave. He always said, one day I'm going to leave this town and I'm going to go where the girls are beautiful and I can just lay in the sun and watch beautiful women everywhere, she stated. Over the course of 3 days, police in Gainesville discovered the bodies of 5 college students, a man and 4 women. 3 of the women had been RP'd and 1 was decapitated that same day. All of them had been stabbed to death and some were left in very strange positions. The murders were eerily similar to 3 others that occurred in Shreveport in November of 1989. So November 1989 would be back when Daniel Blank was just basically right getting out of high school. He may not have that much education, but that is not a signifier for felony crimes, such as burglaries. She said she thought of Rowling, who was just a few months after the murders in their community. She said something deeply disturbing to her husband, Stephen Dobbin. He would come over every night for a while, and then one night, he comes and goes, "I have to go," just out of the blue. Devin told her that Rowling had told him he had a problem. I said, "What kind of problem?" And he said, "I love to stick knives into people." Jurisic said she dismissed the comments when she heard about him because of all the strange pranks and stories that are on the internet. But now she's looked back at it very, very closely. And as news of the Gainesville murders haunted Jurisic, in November 1990, she decided to contact police on a hunch that Rowling was tied to multiple other murders. It would not let me rest. And then one day I picked up the phone. I called Crime Stoppers and said, there's this one guy you need to investigate named Danny Rowling. By the time she reported Rowling, police had already arrested another man who they believed to be a suspect in Gainesville, Ed Humphrey. Don Maines, investigator on the case with Florida Department of Law, said they received several tips pointing to Humphrey. He was known to carry knives, had been off meds, and had a mental disorder, so it seemed he would be a good suspect. He was arrested just days after the murder and held on a $1 million bond. Former attorney Rod Smith said that when investigators searched the home, they found magazines and plenty of dirty magazines as well. We had a lot of physical evidence that, according to our technology at the time, it placed Ed right there. Sonia Larson and Christine Powell were new students at the University of Florida. Larson's mother, Ada Larson, said she hated the fact that her daughter would be living off campus. On August 26, 1990, Emery said Powell's parents arrived at the apartment and banged on the door. There was no response. Betty Kernat, the manager at the complex, stated she was standing behind the worker when he broke down the door. When he went in, I followed him in the apartment. So they all believe that it was really this other man, this older man named Humphreys. However, additional evidence and different DNA samples has started pointing to the fact that it is indeed Danny Rowling who broke into a number of these houses, not only in Gainesville but also in Louisiana. And so that, added with other facts, starts to make you really question. He knew about the Arcuries. He was there in Shreveport in the same area. Could Danny Rowling indeed be the one who was involved in killing numbers of these people, including the Arcuries there in Louisiana? Given his history and given other things that have been found, I'm going to say tentatively, yes, that must be true. I do believe Danny Rowling was definitely involved. I can say that for a fact now that I believe it. It requires, though, other forensics and so on to also be completed and done. But he was, no question, he was involved. He has a strange history, and it makes it look like Ed Humphrey was more of the fall guy in the end. But it's a real interesting story. I'll link it. Make sure you guys, spread the word on this and take a look at it yourselves. It makes a lot more sense that rather than it being Daniel Blank, that it was in fact maybe an associate somehow of Daniel Blank, because he was in the same area, see. And if that was the case, Daniel Rowling, because that has popped up quite a bit when researching anything on this case, it makes perfect sense. He was involved. Thank you again. Like, comment, subscribe. There's always more around the corner. Thank you.